Yeah, welcome back to our reading of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We're still dealing with the first rule, Peterson's Lobster universe, Jordan Lobster Peterson. And he makes different claims. I think one of his major claims is that hierarchy is something natural. I try to look up some videos, so sometimes he says different things about the idea that everything is natural. So I called him a kind of social Darwinist, naturalist last time. But in the second chapter, I actually discovered that he also argues in a very phenomenological way. I think he does not clarify his methods entirely. So I'm way more impressed by the second chapter. But now let's focus first on the first chapter, which is the rule that you should straighten your back like a lobster and let all the serotonin flow out and become more aggressive, right? So that you can be more successful and that you are not bullied. So I have chosen this picture here. I found that on the internet. I will link that down below. And so why have I chosen that? Well, obviously it's Monopoly. And Jordan Peterson makes various claims about the state of our society. And he believes that the inequality distribution that we have is effect of nature. And I was unsure whether he really says that, so I tried to look up some videos and I actually found one where he actually explains his 12 rules for life. And we will just look into this and then see that he actually really believes that an inequality distribution is a fact of nature. So let's watch this very short clip from his lecture on his 12 rules for life.
The idea of the hierarchy is at least 350 million years old. And so I read that and I think, well, so much for the idea that human hierarchies are a sociocultural construct. It's like, no, that's wrong. It's not just a little bit wrong, it's unbelievably wrong. It's mind-bogglingly wrong, right? And it's, right, and so hierarchies have been around for 1/3 of a billion years, and we have a neurochemical system that modulates our understanding of those hierarchies. And then also, and this is the interesting thing too, and this is why people's reputations are so important to them, there's lots of reasons, but this is one of them, is that where this counter that you share with Lobsters rates you in terms of your hierarchical position determines the ratio of negative emotion to positive emotion that you feel.
Yeah, so far so good. So we see that he really believes that inequalities that we have are not socially constructed. They are not a result of our society. They are actually facts of nature, and everybody who claims that otherwise is mind-bogglingly wrong. Mind-bogglingly wrong. My dog is also commenting on that, so I have to take her on my lap. She's a little bit excited. So, and I mean, I'm not denying that there are inequalities that emerge in societies that try to organize themselves. So probably it's inevitable that when you have an unbalanced game that you can bring it to equality immediately, right? And maybe I'm also not for equality. The question to me is inequality just or is it not just? I think that's a more important question. I mean, obviously, we want to pay somebody who does a good job better than somebody who does a bad job. And I think that's a fundamental principle of justice that we usually follow. Not justifying the principle itself here, but kind of intuitively clear to us that we want to have some kind of version of that. Now, the question that we very often have with regard to these billionaires, are they actually justified to have these billions? And then there are these people who just, without any doubt, say, of course, they are so smart and they have taken the chance. And I don't know, maybe, but I think people are too certain about that. And so that's what I want to question. And if it's a law of nature, it should really produce law-like structures. So if we, for example, take the Pareto principle into account, then we say, okay, 20% of the world's population should have 80% of the wealth. And why is that? Well, indeed, we observe these Pareto principles, for example, very accurately in languages. There's something that is called Zipf's law, and that's probably not, or probably it can be done in a sense. We know that the position, or for example, the first word that we have in a natural language, and even in Esperanto, is used twice as often as the second word, and 3 times as often as the third most frequent word of that language, and 4 times as often as the fourth most frequent word in that language, and so on and so forth. So we have here natural distributions that surprisingly occur in something that is not simply a fact of nature, which is language. In fact, language is a kind of a middle phenomenon between something that is made by nature and that is made by human actions. So that's usually what we call a sociological fact or a so-called phenomenon of a third kind. So yeah, now the question is whether these law-like structures really occur in society and whether we really have the Pareto principle, and therefore it would be a perfect lobster distribution. And I looked into like several brief discussions of the Pareto principle. So for example, first I found this blog. It's just the first indication. I'm not sure whether Dave Rooney has the competence to write about that. Let's just look very briefly at it. But I found interesting what he said. He said, like Fibonacci, there's an air of science when using like Pareto, but the problem is that it's very dependent on the context. Would you like the software developers writing the code for a pacemaker to invoke Pareto? Okay, so that's life-critical software. How about those at Amazon saying that the code that calculates shipping costs is good enough after hitting the 80 threshold? Suppose that code overcharges on 10% of orders and you don't even realize it. So the Pareto distribution is hard to be applied, especially when we say, okay, we want to do this new age stuff and just want to do 20% of the most important work to achieve 80% of the results. So that's the first criticism. And the real issue is that we don't know if the ratio is 80-20, 70-30, or 60-40, or any other arbitrary combination. For a pacemaker, I certainly want it to be 100. Now, this is already a problem with the Pareto principle, but I also found some other resources on the internet. So, for example, I found the Pareto law here tested in marketing, and there it is not the 80-20 rule, there it is actually the 60-20 rule, which means I believe here that a brand's heaviest 20% of buyers generally contribute not much more than half of a brand sale, and these same buyers will contribute less in the following time period. Indeed, even for stable brands, half of last year's heavy buyers will then not even qualify to be in the top 20%. So here we have something where we can say, well, that's also kind of social construction, like how much buyers buy of a certain brand, and it does not work. The Pareto principle here does not work as often as we want to use it. So now you may say, well, okay, for these instances, I don't see yet how that applies to Peterson. So I also looked into wealth distributions. And here we have an essay on that issue, the Pareto distribution of world's GDP by Zoran Peter Tomek. You can look that up. I will put the DOI into the links. And let's just look at the results. I mean, they're not super surprising, but I think surprising is it this? Yeah. In this article, we dealt with the issue of Pareto rule. It can apply to the case of distribution of GDP at world level. Although many other studies have shown that at the present time does not apply Pareto's 80-20 rule when it comes down to individual distribution of wealth, the same can be concluded for the distribution of GDP. Specifically based on the analysis in Table 2, can be seen that this ratio goes up to 90-20 or 87-20. So it can be said that the new Pareto rule is 90-20. So let's look at Table 2. Yeah. So actually, I don't go to Table 2, I go to Figure 4. And here we see the share of 20% of the richest countries. I guess share of 20% of the richest countries. in the world and observed period. So, okay, I don't know if I interpret that here correctly, but it seems this is the amount of wealth that they own. And you see, this can vary quite a lot, right? I mean, it can be in 1980, 85%, and then it can go up to 87, 88%. So I wonder if it's a law of nature. Why does it have so much fluctuation? Maybe it has something to do with how we organize our societies and how exploitive our societies are supposed to be. Is poverty an inevitable fact of the nature of human societies? Well, that's a big question. And Jordan Peterson gives a very clear answer on that. In my opinion, it seems to me that there are kind of natural laws by which our societies are guided, by which also economies are driven. But economies can also be probably structured by human beings. But that would not align with a liberal idea of how a market should function. But I think we are far away from having a definite conclusion on this problem. Now, and just to say, my opinion is usually that we should have less control of the economic statuses of societies, because then societies improve. So my position is driven towards the liberal ideology, but I'm aware that it is an ideology, and it seems Peterson states that as a fact of nature. So having that said, let's get back to Peterson and let's see how he does not only look at the Pareto principle, but also how he looks at nature itself. So yeah, let's just go to the important passage again. Here, Peterson writes clearly, this means that dominance hierarchies have been an essentially permanent feature of the environment to which all complex life has adapted. So he says that the inequality distributions that we have are a fact of nature. And I'm not going so far that we are that nature produces equality. That would be absurd. I think it's very likely that we rather get a disbalanced system than a balanced system. And so it's more likely that a disbalanced system goes into the direction of the 80-20 rule. But it is a question whether we want that in our society and whether societies can influence that. And since it seems to me that the Pareto distributions fluctuate, it doesn't have to be 80-20 necessarily, right? So that's all what I want to say on Pareto. Maybe you let me know your opinion. So yeah, if you look into the descriptions, you find the various links that I have used for this video. You can also find a link to my website where I actually talk about philosophy and what I perceive philosophy to be. I would be very happy if you subscribe to this channel and maybe also to my newsletter that I have never written so far, but maybe I should start with it. And my ideas of what philosophy is. Yeah, so like this video or dislike it because you're a Peterson fanboy. Yeah, but yeah, I enjoy making these videos, and I hope that I can reach a larger audience, and then we can, it motivates me reading more of that literature and to deep dive into the ideas and look for the ontological presuppositions that these approaches actually make. And hopefully, with regard to that, I can then also organize my own philosophy, and I can maybe also convince my viewers of the kind of relativist philosophy that I try to develop. So thank you very much. Be a lobster and bye-bye.